The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my guests, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel will once again be answering questions from our listeners. And today's question is from Lorenzo, who comes from Rovigi, Italy. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Lorenzo. Who asks, quote, European politics seems to be moving more in a divided direction. Here in Italy, Giorgia Meloni, the leader of the right-wing Brothers of Italy party, is our prime minister. In France, Macron's decision to call snap elections for parliament saw some gains from Marine Le Pen's far-right party, but France seems to have rejected the center and the far right and shifted more toward the new Popular Front, a leftist coalition. France now has a hung parliament. In Germany, one of the German states, Thuringia, and possibly in another, Saxony, the far-right Alternative für Deutschland party is expected to win a majority of seats. In England, the right-leaning Tories were soundly defeated by the left-leaning Labour Party. And Lorenzo has two questions. How can all these different ideologies coexist in Europe? Do these divisions make Europe weaker? And question two, what might these differences of political ideologies mean for NATO, for migration, for addressing the climate crisis?
It seems to me, well, let me address this way, and thanks very much for the question. It seems to me that people all over the world are flailing for some kind of answer. And whether that answer comes from the left or the right, moving towards extremes, being polarized, whether it's in this country where we don't even agree on basic facts anymore. This is a symptom of a world in flux due to many factors, but largely driven by massive amounts of immigration that are changing populations in countries around the world. We saw this in Germany. Spent a lot of time in Germany from 2016 or 15 to 2021. Germany doesn't look like what we saw in the old newsreel photos anymore. It's a very different looking place now than it had been. And we see this in England. I saw it in England as well, where immigrants were being beset upon, in their shops by sort of young ruffian types who were turning over their postcard racks in Piccadilly Circus and, committing small acts of vandalism against them to express their hatred for Pakistanis being in Great Britain and so on. Maybe they should have thought of that when they conquered half the world. But, there's consequences to past decisions that we're coming to reckon with, and it's going to take some time to sort it all out. But I do think in the end, moderation is going to win, progress is going to win, and that we will somehow work our way past these extremely divisive times that we live in.
Yeah, I would agree. It almost seems like society as a whole is searching for something. When society is searching for something different, something that may move them forward for progress, sometimes we look to all the wrong places for that. Germany in the 1930s did. United States did in 2016. Hopefully they won't do it again in 2020 or 2024. I think that, of course, when you get all these different ideologies, the hope is that you have reasonable actors, that everybody understands that you have to work together regardless, because you are not an island of your own. You cannot stand by yourself. And I think that's something that, those here in the United States that believe in isolationism again need to take stock of. Yes, we can do an awful lot ourselves. However, it would be detrimental not only to the rest of the world, it would be detrimental to ourselves as well. If you don't like prices today, wait to see if we were totally self-sufficient. And I think we discussed that in another podcast. As a society, as a civilization as a whole, if this doesn't say that we need to have a better political class, nothing does. And our political class is still in many ways fashioned after post-World War II. There was some good times passed in post-World War II for a lot of countries. It was a beneficial time. But at the same time, that was 80 years ago. And now new generations are becoming dissatisfied with the direction that their countries and the world is taking as far as society is concerned, as far as how civilization is moving forward. And I think they're just searching. Will this impact NATO? No, I don't think it'll impact NATO at all, because basically NATO is there for a purpose. It's for a military purpose, not for a political ideology purpose. Let's remember, the Hungarians are still in. There's a lot of countries there that have a totally, the Turks are still in. So there's a lot of political ideology division that does not truly impact NATO as it works. The EU, that might be a different ball game altogether. I'm not sure. Going to have to see how that plays out. But usually these things only last a couple of cycles, political cycles. It's the hope that everybody wants to get back to boring politics, but boring politics with leadership that actually moves the societies forward, as opposed to the ones that still look to the past. And I think that's really where the direction that we're seeing. Italians, and I've been to Italy numerous times, and I love Italy. There's all sorts of different government structures that they've had. I mean, I would say to Lorenzo, name me two government structures in the past 20 years that are basically the same, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find two ideologies that were the same over those 20 years. Italians have a tendency to switch around. The elections in France, Macron called them, didn't go as well as he thought, but it didn't go so far to the right like, people thought it was going to go. Le Pen, made a little bit of an advancement, but not near what they should have. In Germany, yes, it looks like one of the states, but we're talking about a minor number of seats. We're not talking about they've taken over that whole state in Germany. So, and when we look at England, okay, Keir Starmer's in there, the Labour Party is in, and it took maybe 4 weeks, and they're already complaining about them. So you look to something new. If it doesn't offer you what you think it should be offering you, because we are a society, we are a race of, we want instant gratification. I want it all fixed tomorrow, regardless of how complex the situation may be. And again, I think it'll probably go back to the way it was. I said many times on this podcast, I think that the American elections will go back to normal probably in 2036. If Kamala Harris wins in 2024, which I hope that she does, I might be able to revise that to 2032. It's people searching for something different than what they're used to, and something that will move society forward. And I think the politicians that come up with those ideas of moving politics forward, moving society forward, and do it by not deciding that division is the correct method to do it, I think those are the politicians that are going to do well.
I'll go even further. I think that Great Britain ends up back in the EU, that Brexit has not worked out well for them, and eventually they'll come back.
If there's a EU to come back to, I agree. I think you'll see that happen, because it was a disaster for them. And once again, people blame the government for it, but I'm sorry, people of Britain, You voted for it. And sometimes you vote against your best interests. And those people that told you what a great deal that Brexit was going to be, they basically lied to you or didn't give you the facts. But then again, you didn't do any research on your own. You took somebody else's word for it. And now you're in the position that you're in. I mean, whose fault is that? And I think that's exactly the way we have to look at these things. Whose fault does that really? Where do you lay where do you lay fault in front of? And you've got to lay it in front of the people. If we elect Donald Trump in 2024 here in the United States, we got nobody to blame but ourselves. So don't cry about what happens for that 4 years. Don't complain about it. You got the government you deserve.
But it won't be 4 years. And if he manipulates the count, then I mean that's my concern, that it may not be accurate. If he's legitimately elected, okay, but it won't be a 4-year stint because
we don't know that. We don't know that.
I mean, I did notice this. I mean, I took note that neither Trump or Vance campaigned on Labor Day at all. They stayed home, or they met privately with supporters or donors or something, whatever it was that they were doing. They weren't out there. This is one of the biggest days of the campaign, generally speaking, right? You go out, you shake hands, you're at parties and parades and barbecues and all kinds of stuff. You know, you used to see him on the beach all the time back in Brooklyn when I lived there. The politicians would come around and shake people's hands and all. And, it's a really, really big day, and they didn't bother with it. Now, I'm not really sure. This is speculation on my part. I don't think he's really running for president right now. He's not in the sense of he's trying to win voters over. He's happy with I think he's got 46% or something like that. He's happy with that. But what he's counting on is chaos after the election, not states not certifying the election and throwing it to the House, where Mike Johnson will happily call for a vote, and the House of Representatives will elect the next president, and it will be Donald Trump. And it'll go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will affirm it. I really do think that that's what Trump is counting on, not winning any votes, but just making sure that the election doesn't get certified. And I hope that doesn't happen, obviously. And you're right, Mark, we don't know what's going to happen if he does become president, but we do know this. We do know that Project 2025 calls for a lot of drastic changes in the way that the federal government works in the executive branch. And we also know this. There was a Project 2017, and in 2017, Trump enacted 64 point something % of that, mostly by executive orders. There is some past to look at here that we need to take as a cautionary way, that this is not normal politics as usual. This is not Republicans versus Democrats. This is somebody else who we've never quite seen before. And he's very charismatic, and he's got a cult, and he's capable of doing horrible things to disrupt the natural path of the United States of America. And we see this time and time again. He's a liar, and he's a rogue and a villain, and we need to do everything in our power, which includes not writing in Mr. Magoo or Mickey Mouse on ballots and throwing them away, because anything that's not a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for Trump.
So back to Lorenzo's question, if the EU in the short term, do you feel, and it depends on what you consider the short term, I recognize, if the EU might be weakened, let's say, by various different ideologies going in different directions. Mark, I know you were saying that ideologically, the EU might be a little on the wobbly side. And let's say that we do not have a Kamala Harris presidency, then what do you think might happen with the EU?
I don't think that the president of the United States is going to have anything to do with the EU at all, even though they may be a little wobbly ideologically. I would say to Lorenzo, look at your prime minister, and she has tread a very conservative yet reasonable line compared to what she may think, because she understands the necessity of cooperation. Anybody that does not think that we're a global society in one way or another attached, and most of that's by economics, you're absolutely not paying any kind of attention. The fact is that we are. There's no bigger right-wing guy than the Hungarian, but he understands that he has to play nice in the sandbox with those other leaders who have a direct impact on his nation's health and welfare. And I think that's the one thing that kind of makes the EU, even though wobbly, it makes it still quite viable, to be honest. The problem is that here in the United States, Trump really believes that we are an island that can be self-sufficient, and there are people dumb enough to actually believe that that's the case. If we elect him, we get the government we deserve. I think that some of the EU leaders, regardless of whether they're right or they're left, they understand that their power is based not on a cult, but is based upon, are my constituents happy with me? And I might want to do this, but I probably can't do it. And I think they're a little bit more guarded, especially in a union like the European Union. I mean, it's kind of like the United States when you really think about it. All the different states we have, and there's different ideologies across the states, but somehow we work together somehow. So yeah, I mean that's why we have the governors conference, where these governors get together. I mean, because they know they have to work together for their own for the people, and it does still take collaboration and cooperation, and hopefully it'll continue to be that way.
You know, I can see progress being slowed down by politics, right? You know, the EU has been pretty gung ho, I think, about climate change, a lot more so than we are here, and that could slow down a little bit as right wingers, you know, step up. But I don't think progress will stop. Philosophically, there's some benefit to checks and balances, to the swing of the pendulum. Eventually, they'll get back on track and continue progress because concerns over the environment will win out over short-term thinking on economics and so on. The rest of the world hopefully will begin to catch up to us as far as economic recovery from the pandemic is concerned, and that they'll be able to move forward. You know, the funny thing is that when you don't have somebody's foot on your neck, you can actually do better, and we see that here right now. Because Joe Biden's got his highest approval numbers in years now that the right-wing media is focused on Kamala Harris and not him. All of a sudden, Joe Biden has become a very popular president, or at least a more popular president than he has been since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's lessons to be learned from everything, and I think that the lesson that we can learn here is that you've got to be really careful when it comes to choosing your sources of information, and that if your sources of information make you unhappy, there may be a reason for that. They may want you to be unhappy, and they want you to be manipulated by your unhappiness, and you can reject that if you want to, and search more broadly for information rather than get it from that one place that makes you so unhappy.
And for everybody's benefit, how are you defining progress? Because obviously for an alt-right conservative MAGA person, progress is going to look quite different than it would be for us as
I think progress is
academics. Go ahead.
Is that true? I mean, I think progress is progress, and the whole reason that there's a conservative movement in America is to stop that progress. That conservatives find that it moves too fast, and they want to they want to stop that. And that's William F. Buckley conservatism right there, right? I don't believe, by the way, that any Trumpers are actually conservative in that sense of the word. They may be conservative in that they have a bizarre feel of one world government or globalists or, lizard people taking over, whatever it is that's bouncing around in those heads of theirs, but that they're not really thinking in terms of taxation and U.S. influence around the world and things like that used to be fairly common conservative values. For example, Republicans have long been the party of law and order. They really are very proud of that. And yesterday, for the first time ever, I read a story about how a guy named Jamie Davidson, who was a drug dealer who was convicted of killing a federal agent during a drug buy sting, was let out of office on Trump's last day in office with a commutation of his sentence, a life sentence without parole, and that he was rearrested in 2023 for throttling his girlfriend in a domestic dispute, or his wife rather, in a domestic dispute, and is now back in I think he was just convicted and found guilty of domestic abuse, domestic violence. She lived through it. She's not dead. And I don't understand how the Republican Party that prides itself on law and order, and how the Republican Party that went after Michael Dukakis for Willie Horton can possibly justify a guy who commuted the sentence of a cop killer on his last day of office. I don't know why this isn't a bigger story. I don't know why. I'm not sure, Brooke, it looks from your face that you're hearing that for the first time. That this is not a common story, that if you could imagine a Democrat doing this, it would be on Fox News every single night.
Yes, and I also was making, I hadn't heard that, and I was also considering that I had heard, I don't know, it was this morning or yesterday, that Trump's vision, he likes the President Xi's idea of executing drug dealers. And so if this man was a drug dealer, then that's what Trump is saying now in his rallies, that drug dealers deserve the death penalty. And so for him to pardoned or whatever, commuted the sentence of someone who was a drug dealer, is that correct? And who murdered a police officer. That is something that people should certainly know about. And I had not heard that at all, no.
Party. First of all, if anybody thinks this is the same Republican Party of the 1980s, and no matter how much you might disagree with Reagan and some of the things that he did, even George W. Bush 1, George W. Bush 2, no matter how much you may not have liked their policies, the fact is that this is not the Republican Party of those years. And actually, the funny thing is the Republican Party today make them seem kind of normal. In a way. Heck, they make Nixon seem a little on the normal side. They embrace Russia. They were always the hawks against Russia. Now, oh no, Russia's great. We like Russia and all that. So yeah, it's not the same Republican Party, and we shouldn't make the mistake that Republican Party still exists. It may, but it's kind of like it's in the background at this point in time. The crazies are running the asylum. And that's all there is to it. Progress to the Republican Party today would be go back to the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, thank you, Lorenzo, for your question. And we'll see you next time.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.